Hi everyone. So thank you once again for all of the kind messages and the encouragement I've been receiving to continue making these videos. So here I am. We're getting ready to read the Torah portion of Lech Lecha. Now in the last two videos, we've been discussing the meaning of the word Hamas in last week's portion in the life of Noach and in David's life in Psalm 140, when the word Hamas actually appears 3 times as well. So now we're beginning to read Parsha Lech Lecha, the Torah portion of Lech Lecha, and we want to try to hear what messages could Hashem be sending us through the Torah for whatever we're going to be facing at this particular time. So now what's interesting is that this week we have the appearance for the first time in the Torah of Yishmael. As many of you may know, Ishmael through the entire Jewish tradition is identified with the Arabian world. It would become the Muslim tradition. That's why the peace accords forged in the Middle East with Arab countries and Israel were called the Abraham Accords, because they were between the children of Abraham, being Israel, the descendants of Yitzchak, and the Muslim world as the descendants of, or the spiritual descendants of Yishmael. So when you meet the inception of an idea or a concept or a representation in the Torah for a first time, there's a lot to learn about how that idea will unfold in history. So as these very particular days we're grappling in our conflict with Islamic terrorism, both in Israel and support for that around the world, what is the Torah guiding us to do? And surprise, surprise, in the very first moment of Yishmael's existence in the world, the first verse that appears after his conception, we again see the Hebrew word Hamas that we saw in last week's portion and in Psalm 140. And this is not a common word in the Torah, don't get me wrong. It only appears in 4 contexts in the entire Torah: in the context of Noah and the evil of that generation, here in our portion, in the story of Shechem kidnapping Dinah, and in the idea of, and in the laws of false witness. So meaning, there are very few mentions of this word in the 5 books of the Torah, and one of them is right here in the very context of Ishmael. So let's look closely. In Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 16, verse 4, we've just learned that Sarah gave her handmaiden to Avram, Hagar, to try to help him have children. And in verse 4, it says that Hagar conceived and she saw she was pregnant, and her mistress became unimportant in her eyes. So she becomes like really sassy. The Midrashic tradition envisions Hagar's mindset. She looks at Sarah, who for years has been trying to get pregnant with no luck. And Hagar, is immediately married to Avram for like 1 day, and she's already pregnant. And she thinks Hashem must love me. I must be way more worthy than her. I'm the real deal. She's obviously not in good graces with Hashem the way I am. And this happens literally in the minute that she conceives Ishmael. And what is the very next verse? Sarai says to Abraham, "May my injustice be upon you." Or in the English, in the English Jewish translation, it's usually called injustice. In the King James, it's translated as "may my wrong be upon thee." But the Hebrew word says "chamasi alecha," may my Hamas be upon you. What does that mean? Rashi says that there's an evil that is happening, and she's saying this evil is happening to me. It's actually your responsibility, Abraham. Now, at first glance, when I'm looking at this story, it really looks to me just like a domestic conflict between like Avram's 2 wives. For those of you who know me, like in my real life, when I'm not busy trying to help my family figure out how to, handle a war, I'm a divorce lawyer. When I'm looking at this, the first thing I see is, okay, it's just, standard couple squabbling. But when you look at it a little bit deeper, you see there's a really fundamental disagreement going on here between Avram and Sarai. It's not just some sort of jealousy or bickering. They are not a bickery couple. We never in the Torah hear them fighting about anything else. Like if my husband Jeremy took me to Egypt, pretended I was his sister, got me kidnapped by a gross tyrant, and only by the grace of God I barely escaped, you could be sure that Jeremy would be sleeping on the couch the next day. But we don't hear any kind of fight about those things at all. And there's this singular, consistent fight between Avram and Sarah on one subject, which is the place of Yishmael in the scheme of their family. So in the very first moment they begin discussing Ishmael, we have this big flashing neon sign of the word Hamas. Look at this, because someday you're going to need to understand when you're trying to figure out the place of Ishmael in history, there's going to be Hamas. There's going to be this kind of evil that comes into the world. So let's follow this conflict. And she says, Avram, this is not working out. And somehow this is your fault. You don't hear a lot of words here, but you kind of get the sense that Avram wants everyone in the family to just get along. He doesn't want to get involved in the ladies squabbling. And Sarah is saying, no, Chamasi alecha, my Hamas is on you. This is your problem too. And then they don't come to a resolution. And what does Sarah say to him? She says, Hashem yishpot beinu bencha. That's like, whoa, Hashem will judge between me and you. Right? That's a really big deal. Like you can imagine there's this back and forth that's going on between Avram and Sarah, 2 different ways of looking at things. And she says, Hashem will show us which one of us is right. They can't come to a resolution on their own. And then we see the continuation of this fight just on the next page. In chapter 21, verse 9, we see Sarah quietly observing the relationship that's developing between Ishmael and Yitzchak. And what is the dynamic that she saw? She sees him it says in English making merry, sometimes in other translations say making a mockery. The Hebrew says mitzachek, like some kind of joking around. And we have really a lot of midrashic traditions trying to figure out what this word means. And the midrash says that what happened was that Yishmael would argue with Yitzchak about who should inherit the land of Israel from Abraham, and Yishmael would shoot arrows at him and then say, oh, I was just kidding when I was shooting you. And that's based on Proverbs verse 26, where it says in chapter 26, in verse 18, where it says, someone who shoots firebrands and arrows and death is like the man who says, I was just joking. So you have this idea within the Bible that this idea of joking can be related to shooting arrows. So he's shooting these constant arrows on Yitzchak, and Sarah is seeing this. And then he's like, oh, I didn't really mean that. Haha, just kidding. And you can't help but get like a little bit of a chill thinking about this, because for years we are facing a Ishmaelite enemy that is arguing with us, just like in this story, about who should inherit the land, and constantly shooting on this barrage of arrows. And many of the time, most of the times, thank God, we don't get killed because we have Iron Dome, and with the help of Hashem, we're able to, knock down many of these rockets that are constantly coming at us for years, but it's never really taken seriously. Just like he's like, well, I'm just kidding. After the war, the attacks from Gaza in 2014, there was a UN report, and the report actually cites that Hamas stated that they were going to target civilians. And then when civilians were targeted by the Hamas rockets, they took responsibility for it. And 4,500 missiles did indeed factually get shot at civilian targets. And you think, okay, this report of the UN is going well. And then it summarizes on page 27, they say, I'm quoting now, the commission cannot know what the intended target of each rocket attack was. Real head scratcher. The Hamas says that they're going to shoot civilians in Israel, and they actually do that, but we're not mind readers. We don't know what they really want. So Sarah sees this too, and Abram says, maybe they'll learn how to get along. And she goes, no, he's trying to kill Yitzchak. You do not get to inherit the land. The next verse, she says, he will not inherit with my son Yitzchak. What is Avram's position? The next verse after that says, Abraham was displeased. So now we're getting to the crux of this. The Hamas that Sarah mentions in our portion is an actual, real, fundamental argument between two lines of thinking, between our mother and father, between Abraham and Sarah. And we don't hear about who argues about taking out the garbage or doing the dishes. We hear about the arguments between our foremothers and forefathers that are going to be fundamental for all of the generations to come, for the future, for us. And here you see these two lines of thinking. Abram says, yes, he has his flaws, but I'm a father of many nations, Hashem said. I'm supposed to be a light of humanity and morality to the world. I have to provide for him. I should give him water and electricity, right? I need to take care of him, because what it means to be a Jew in the world is to have the utmost moral purity. The Sephorno says that people thought that Ishmael was jealous because Avram and Sarah made Yitzchak a party when they weaned him, and they didn't make Ishmael a party. So they feel like Avram looks at him and says, well, Ishmael's feeling bad, he's feeling jealous, he's feeling discriminated against. That's why he's shooting these arrows. But then against that voice is the voice of Sarah saying, no, you might have a job to be a moral beacon to the world, but you also have another job. That's to bring the covenant through Yitzchak, who's going to be the nation of Israel. And that actually has to come first. In chapter 7, verse 17, when we have the promise of Yitzchak being born, it's such a fascinating conversation, because Hashem tells Abraham that he's going to have this son through Sarah. And then the verse says, he rejoices, will a child be born to one who is 100 years old and with Sarah who is 90 years old? And he's just rejoiced. But then there's no other verse. Right in the very next verse, it says, and Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael will live before you. Meaning, from the very, very beginning, Abraham has this impulse that Ishmael and Yitzchak need to be treated the same. And then in verse 19, God answers him, and Hashem said, indeed your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall name him Yitzchak, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his seed after him. And regarding Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him. I will make him fruitful. I will multiply him exceedingly. He will beget 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. So Hashem has been having this back and forth with Abraham as well for a while. And it says, Abraham is saying, I'd really like things to work out for Ishmael and Yitzchak together. And Hashem says, don't worry about Ishmael. Ishmael will be blessed. He will have 12 princes. But then there's this other covenant on the land of Israel. That's just Yitzchak. And it's so insane because it's all right here in our portion. Abraham says, wait, can't they just together have this everlasting covenant? And all you have to do, and Hashem says, no, there's going to be these 12 kingdoms for Ishmael. All you have to do is actually take out a map of the Middle East. And when I did this, I almost fell off of my chair. There are precisely 12 Arab Muslim countries in the Middle East: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the Sinai Peninsula, which is Arab and now belongs to Egypt. I mean, you can't make that up. They have precisely 12 kingdoms in the Middle East. And the Torah is showing us in this ongoing disagreement between the Sarah way of thinking and the Abraham way of thinking that Abraham is constantly pushing in the direction of, let's also share the land of Israel. Let's have a two-state solution. He doesn't really mean it when he shoots rockets on Yitzchak. Ishmael is he's just jealous. He's just having a hard time. And Sarah's saying, no, you don't split the land. As long as Ishmael is trying to take the inheritance for himself and trying to shoot Yitzchak in a constant barrage of arrows, this cannot go on. He can have 12 countries of his own, but Yitzchak's safety and well-being comes first. And if Ishmael takes that attitude that he is taking, he is out. And it cannot be resolved. And they are fighting about this for years. Avram and Sarah are fighting about this for years. And Sarah cannot convince him. And she says, Hashem will judge between us, meaning Hashem as reality, as the decider of all reality and the God of history is going to indeed show us who is right. Because there's a deep conflict here. There are two purposes for the Jewish people. We do have the job of being a moral light. We are supposed to teach the world how to be kind and soft and gentle, but we also have a second job, which is to create a nation living together in peace in the land of Israel. Now, usually those things can work out together. There can be a nation of Israel living in the land and being a light unto the nations. But what happens if there's a conflict? What happens if the survival of Israel versus the pure morality and gentleness and kindness that we want to have, what if those two things contradict? This conflict was foreseen already in the Torah. And the Torah is showing us that there are these two positions, and sometimes they're not going to work out together. And in the end, Sarah and Abraham are having these two voices, and Hashem tells Abraham in the end, listen to Sarah's voice. You know, in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a mystical text, they ask, why was Yishmael named Yishmael? It's a bit of a weird name, because Yishmael is in future tense, but if the meaning of his name as in the Torah is Hashem has heard me, that should be Shama'el. Why is he named Yishmael, which is in future tense? And Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says that one day, in the end of days, Hashem will hear the cries of grief of the Jewish people from that which Ishmael will do to the Jews once they've already come back to the land. I mean, that's really unbelievable. It's precisely what we're seeing. And, you know, in the Zohar, which is perhaps the most important mystical text in Judaism, it says that the angel of Ishmael came to Hashem and said, why doesn't Ishmael get some of the land? He was circumcised when he was 13. He should get some kind of credit for that. And then Hashem said, fine. He will get the land for 1,300 years, but then it will go to Yitzchak. And I was looking at just the history of this. Turns out that in the year 640 was the year that the Arab Muslim conquest of the land of Israel was conquered from the Byzantines. It's almost 1,300 years, give or take like 8 years, to the dot to the establishment of the state of Israel. The establishment of the state of Israel. So this is like telling us they will have a portion of the land, but when there's the establishment of the state of Israel, that will be over. And we're told from this mystical tradition and from this story of Abraham and Yitzchak, there's going to be this line of Hamas in the land, this evil in the land, this pain caused to us in the land, and it's going to be based on this desire of Ishmael to inherit the land. But within this argument between Abraham and Sarah, Sarah's voice is supposed to win out. That is what we see being told to us in the Torah. But you know, what's interesting is that in the end, in the Torah itself, we do see that Hashem sides with Sarah and says, yes, if Ishmael is going to be endangering Yitzchak, you have to send him away. But that's not the end of the story, because at the very end of the story of Abraham's life, Abraham dies, and who goes to bury him? The Torah says that Ishmael and Yitzchak buried him together. There was eventual peace between Yitzchak and Ishmael. And how did that happen? The Midrash says that Ishmael was willing to accept that his blessing was his blessing and Yitzchak's inheritance is Yitzchak's inheritance. And to recognize that, they were able to come together in peace and honor Abraham's memory. And you know, it's worth mentioning that, you know, a few inspirations from our time. Amser Abu Sabila is a 25-year-old Muslim who tried to save a 6-year-old and 3-year-old girl because he heard her mom crying for help. during this last massacre. He's a father of 2 children. He ran out and saved this family. He and the mother got shot and the 2 little girls were saved. He left his own 2 children orphans to save 2 Jewish girls. Yosef Zaidana, a Bedouin Muslim minibus driver, drove in under fire to the music party and saved 30 Jews. There is this option open to Yishmael to do the right thing, to join Israel, to honor Abraham's legacy together. Even if it's a small minority, that can happen. But Hashem is so clear that for those among Yishmael who will not join and accept Hashem's destiny for each nation, if they don't do that, if they continue to endanger Yitzhak, then Hashem is very, very clear here. The message is so loud here in the Torah, where Hashem says to Abraham, what Sarah says, you must listen to her voice. You have to separate Ishmael from Yitzhak, no matter how uncomfortable it feels, and no matter how difficult it is for you to see Ishmael's suffering, you have to do it in order to save Yitzhak. Your first priority is to save Yitzhak, and that comes before any other calculation that you might make about proportionality or giving humanitarian aid. Your first priority, the Torah is telling us, is to make sure that Yitzhak is safe in his land. After that, we can work on coming together to find peace to honor Abraham's legacy. And so, for me, I find great comfort in learning these chapters that we're studying together, because it feels to me like Hashem is telling us, I've laid this out before you. It's in the Torah, it's in our midrash, it's in our, it's in all of our mystical Kabbalistic traditions. It's there. And so that, for me, I find really encouraging and strengthening. And with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and may we hear good news in this coming week.